We are continuing the conversation about Agile and collaboration here at Agile 2015 from booth 420 here on the exhibit floor. I'm with Guy Duncan of PayU, and Guy, we were talking about Agile and collaboration in many levels and in many different definitions here over the last 2 days. But we haven't talked about Agile in scale, the really big projects. Tell me your experience and your history here.
Yeah, so I started working with Luke about 3 years ago, and at that time I was the global CTO of a company called Bwin.party, and we had over 100 Scrum teams. We had basically 7 or 8 different countries, 3 continents, multiple time zones, and we had some real serious problems with the portfolio, with the technology, and what we needed to deliver for the business. So Luke and I collaborated, and we wanted to basically do a massive retrospection. So retrospection is one of the techniques where you basically, at the end, you take a pause at the end of a sprint, and you ask the teams basically to give you feedback about how that sprint was. We did a different twist on it. We said we're going to involve 42 teams. Eventually we did all of them. The initial phase was 42 teams, about 350 people. And we basically asked the question about what the statefulness of how we were doing with delivery and how we were doing with the Agile adoption in general. And we did this exercise called the speedboat exercise. The speedboat exercise is very simple. You've got, in the model of the speedboat exercise, you have your boat anchors that make your boat go slow, right? And then you've got the propellers which make your boat go fast. And so we asked those questions: what are your boat anchors and what are your propellers? And what was amazing is the data that we got. I mean, it really was revolutionary. And I've been at software development, whatever, leadership, coder, all that kind of thing for the last 25 years. And it was one of those top 3 moments where the data that we got back through Luke's platform and in terms of engaging those voices in a very meaningful way was the people knew, and it wasn't being reported back up. We weren't getting that data. It just wasn't coming through.
And why do you think that is? I mean, in business, it seems to be a foundational truth that you should be reporting back problems up the chain so that you can actually address them. And it sounds like this was almost a revelation versus just maybe minor tweaks in the plan.
Yeah, so what was interesting, as opposed to asking line managers, and we had a lot of managers, what the problem was, and you got a viewpoint, and everything got translated, we were able to ask each individual. We were able to engage each individual. We were able to engage each team and to get that data. And what happens is when you put it into a platform and you're able to look at all that raw data, you're able to see clusters of data. And we found common themes of that information, which led to real meaningful insight. And in our case, it was around a compliance problem, compliance in terms of delivering for countries. And so we were able to cluster and solve that problem. And it was revolutionary. It was just incredible how we were able to get it. So the scale, the sample size was also very significant. So the amount of data in each one of the retrospections from each individual, we were getting a ton of data. So even 350 people, it was 40 some odd teams, but we literally got tons of data, and we were able to quantify that and create heat maps and basically really get to the root and the solution.
Well, I mean, it sounds like this is data mining.
Yes.
I mean, it's definitely a step up from what typically is done.
Right.
But there's a challenge with that because you have to have the resources, and not only the resources, but the understanding of how to interpret that data. How did you do it?
So, in terms of interpreting and looking at the data, it was a reflective process of understanding where our constraints were. So when you're trying to basically deliver, you have these constraints. The data was very revealing about where those constraints were, and then how we needed to solve those. So if you were attuned with that, and you were willing to basically to trust the data, and to trust the people that were reporting the data, as opposed to saying, oh, this is basically problematic. And also we had the willingness to change the organizational structure to also solve that problem, which is one advantage you get in business versus necessarily government, right?
Yeah. I was going to say the willingness to change, those are words that are not heard very often in the enterprise and in business in general. So with your experience with Agile in scale and the 25 years of doing what you've done, you took this experience and used it in a personal situation. Tell me about that.
So I was so struck by that, the power of the retrospection. And in Agile and Scrum, we've been doing retrospection all the time, but I'd never applied retrospection to my own personal life. And so at that time, I had gone through a divorce. I have 2 daughters, one's 22 and one's 20. And at that time, they were like 20 and 18. And what I was so struck by that process of the retrospection, I felt that I could use that technique of retrospection with them individually to get the data, and also with myself. And so I engaged them in a retrospection, so to speak, on the topic of the divorce. And we did 5 or 6 iterations, and I gathered this. And by the way, I was at that time living in southern Spain, in Gibraltar.
Wow.
And one of them was in Paris, and one of them was back in the US. So they were distributed.
Sure.
It was multiple time zones. And I basically, through Skype and taking notes, I kind of did this. And I did it. I knew it wasn't going to be episodal. I needed to do it many, many times. So we did it 5 or 6 times. And then I also did it myself. And I just looked at the data. And what was interesting, after 2 or 3 times, a pattern started to emerge. And the commonality in terms of what we were all going through was there. And it became very much a tool for healing. It became a way of connecting with my daughters in a real meaningful way. And it became a way of really talking honestly and openly with no fear about actually what the problems were. And I think that's really the secret, right? The secret is to gauge the voice in a context, in a way in which there's no fear, and they can talk openly about it, and that the people listening to that are open to hearing that as well, which I think is very powerful.
I think it's incredibly powerful. Well, obviously there's a wealth of information there, and retrospective feedback is really, it sounds like where it's at if you're going to get ahead.
Yes, definitely. And I think that within Agile and Scrum, you're seeing some really powerful items develop, like retrospection, which comes out of really good psychology and really good human intelligence skills. And then tools and platforms which allow you to gather that. It can be transformative for an organization. And to use that, right, in terms of solving really big, massive problems, huge, massive problems, like, issues of democracy, or spending cuts, or world hunger, whatever that might be, is really interesting to me. Because, my prior life, right, did Peace Corps. We didn't have these type of tools,
right.
to get that kind of feedback. So it's really interesting to me.
It sounds like it's the Steve Jobs mantra of think different.
That's right.
Guy Duncan, thanks so much. Great interview.
You bet. Thank you. Appreciate it.